Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank is one of the most powerful and moving accounts of the Holocaust, and one of the most widely read books in the world. Written between 1942 and 1944, Anne Frank's diary captures the intimate thoughts, dreams, and fears of a young Jewish girl living in hiding during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. The diary was initially a private record, a birthday gift from Anne's father, Otto Frank, who believed it would help his daughter through the challenges of adolescence. However, the world would come to know Anne's poignant voice when the diary was published posthumously in 1947, 2 years after her death in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Anne Frank's writing transcends the historical events it describes. It resonates with universal themes of identity, hope, and the enduring human spirit. Though just 13 when she began writing, Anne's reflections on the complexities of growing up, her struggles with family dynamics, relationships, and the pressures of being a young girl are both deeply personal and profoundly relatable. However, the context of Anne's life in hiding amidst the constant threat of discovery and death by the Nazis adds layers of urgency and poignancy to her observations. Her diary not only offers a glimpse into the mind of an extraordinary young woman, but also provides a record of the devastating effects of the Holocaust on individuals, families, and communities. Throughout her writings, Anne struggles with feelings of isolation, confusion, and fear. Yet she also demonstrates an incredible resilience and maturity beyond her years. Her reflections on human nature, morality, and the complexities of love and loss elevate her words to a level of timeless reflection. While the events in Anne's life unfolded against a backdrop of unimaginable horror, her voice remains one of hope and a deep desire for understanding. The impact of Anne Frank's diary is immeasurable. It has not only educated millions about the atrocities of the Holocaust, but has also become a symbol of the hope that one can maintain one's humanity, even in the darkest of times. In this summary, we will follow Anne's journey through her years in hiding, highlighting the emotional and psychological complexities she faced. From her candid explorations of family life to her quiet determination to grow into the woman she envisioned, Anne's diary paints a portrait of a young girl whose voice, though silenced too soon, continues to echo throughout history. Now, we begin our exploration of Anne's world through her powerful words, as her diary unfolds in the hidden annex of Amsterdam. Anne Frank begins her diary on her 13th birthday, receiving a small red and white checkered notebook from her father, Otto Frank. She is filled with excitement as she writes the first entries in what she calls her friend, a companion for her thoughts during what will become one of the most difficult and terrifying periods of her life. The gift is more than just a present. It is a symbol of her desire to find an outlet for her feelings, her frustrations, and her dreams. At first, Anne's writing is lighthearted and casual, filled with observations about her family and friends, as well as the events unfolding in the world around her. She shares her thoughts on her school life, her relationships with classmates, and the typical growing pains of adolescence. Anne, a young girl full of curiosity, sees the diary as a means of understanding herself in the midst of a world that is changing rapidly. However, it isn't long before Anne's writing takes on a more somber tone, reflecting the ominous political climate in Europe and the increasingly hostile environment for Jewish people under Nazi rule. Anne begins to describe her life in Amsterdam, where she lives with her parents, Otto and Edith Frank, and her older sister, Margit. The family's existence is relatively normal at first, but the looming specter of anti-Semitic laws and rising tensions in Europe begin to cast a shadow over their lives. Anne's diary entries reflect a young girl's growing awareness of the world around her, one that is rapidly becoming a place of fear and uncertainty. The diary reveals Anne's complex relationship with her family. She is especially close to her father, Otto, who is described as kind, thoughtful, and gentle. He is a source of stability in Anne's life, someone she deeply admires. In contrast, her relationship with her mother, Edith, is strained and full of tension. Anne often feels misunderstood by her mother, who she feels treats her differently than Margit. In the eyes of Anne, her mother seems to favor Margit, the older, more obedient daughter. Anne expresses a deep sense of frustration with this perceived favoritism, but it is clear that she longs for a more meaningful connection with her mother, even though their differences often push them further apart. As Anne starts to explore her own identity, she reflects on her feelings of isolation, her desire for independence, and her search for meaning in a world that seems increasingly hostile to her. She writes about the difficulties of being a young Jewish girl in a society that views her as different. The anti-Semitic laws are becoming more stringent, and Jews are increasingly ostracized and discriminated against. Yet, Anne's writing is filled with sharp wit, and her ability to find humor in her situation is one of the remarkable aspects of her personality. Despite the uncertainty surrounding their future, Anne's optimism shines through. She holds on to the belief that things will improve and that the world will eventually return to a sense of normalcy. Her writing reveals the depths of her introspection. She writes not only about the events of the day, but also about her internal struggles. Anne is deeply concerned with the person she is becoming. Her thoughts frequently turn to her relationship with her own self-image, and she often wonders what her future holds. She is in the midst of adolescence, a time when young people experience dramatic emotional and physical changes. But for Anne, this period of self-discovery is compounded by the external dangers of living as a Jew in Nazi-occupied Europe. It is this internal conflict between her personal development and the ever-looming threat of violence and hatred that gives Anne's diary its raw emotional power. The summer of 1942 brings a turning point for Anne and her family. With the situation in Europe becoming increasingly dire, Otto Frank makes the difficult decision to send his family into hiding. Anne writes about the fear and anxiety surrounding this decision. Her family must leave behind their home, their friends, and their lives as they enter a secret annex in an office building owned by Otto's former business associate, Mr. Krahler. This decision marks the beginning of a new chapter in Anne's life, one that is defined by secrecy, fear, and uncertainty. The fear of being discovered and sent to a concentration camp looms large, and the family's lives are turned upside down as they adjust to their new reality. The annex, which will become their home for the next 2 years, is cramped and dark, and Anne's writing begins to reflect the difficulties of living in such close quarters with others. The family shares the annex with another Jewish family, the Van Pels, as well as a dentist, Albert Dussel. The dynamics between the two families are complicated, and Anne is keenly aware of the tensions that arise. The constant fear of discovery adds an extra layer of stress to an already strained environment. And Anne writes about the difficulties of living in such close proximity to others. She is forced to adapt to a new way of life, one that involves constant vigilance and the need for silence. The noise of the outside world is now a distant memory, replaced by the eerie quiet of their hiding place. Though she is initially overwhelmed by the prospect of living in hiding, Anne's writing shows her resilience and her ability to adapt. She writes about the small comforts that make life in the annex bearable, such as the time she spends reading, writing, and reflecting on her life. Anne's diary becomes a sanctuary for her, a place where she can express her thoughts and feelings without fear of being judged. In the privacy of her diary, Anne is able to explore her fears, her hopes, and her dreams in a way that she cannot do with the people around her. Anne's writing also becomes a way for her to process the emotional impact of their new reality. As she adjusts to life in hiding, Anne reflects on the fragility of life and the uncertainty that now governs their existence. She writes about the constant tension that comes with living in fear, the worry that at any moment their world could be shattered by the sound of a knock at the door. Despite these overwhelming fears, Anne's diary reveals a young girl who is determined to remain hopeful and to find meaning in even the darkest of circumstances. In these early entries, Anne's voice emerges as both wise beyond her years and deeply relatable. She is caught between the innocence of childhood and the harsh realities of the world around her. As Anne begins her journey in hiding, her diary not only chronicles the day-to-day details of life in the annex, but also captures her evolving thoughts on humanity, identity, and the future. Her words, penned in the secrecy of the annex, are a testament to her resilience and her unyielding desire to find meaning and understanding in a world that has been turned upside down. As Anne and her family settle into the cramped, hidden annex, the reality of their situation begins to sink in. Life in hiding is an exercise in both endurance and patience. Every day is a delicate balance between maintaining an outward sense of normalcy and keeping the constant fear of discovery at bay. Anne writes about the growing tensions within the annex as she shares this confined space with her parents, her sister Margaret, and the Van Pels family. The latter consists of Mr. Van Pels, his wife, and their son Peter, who is around Anne's age. Additionally, Albert Dussel, the dentist, joins them in their seclusion. Each person in the annex has their own personality, quirks, and struggles, and the interactions between them provide Anne with much to reflect upon. The tight quarters and the daily necessity of silence amplify the inevitable conflicts that arise among the residents. Anne begins to describe the emotional challenges that come with living in such close proximity to others, especially those with whom she has little in common. Peter, the Van Pels son, stands out as a key figure in Anne's early entries. At first, she is unsure of him, perceiving him as shy, introverted, and somewhat distant. Peter keeps to himself, which makes it hard for Anne to understand him. She is annoyed by his lack of conversation and his apparent disinterest in interacting with the others in the annex. However, she does not judge him too harshly as she understands that everyone is coping with their own fears and anxieties. Anne, too, is trying to navigate her emotions, struggling with the isolation of her new life, the lack of privacy, and the complexities of her relationship with her family. In her writings, Anne reveals a growing awareness of her own inner turmoil. She is deeply conflicted about her place in the annex and in the world at large. Though she tries to maintain a sense of normality by continuing her studies, writing, and reading, Anne feels like a prisoner in her own life. She is trapped between the safety of hiding and the loss of freedom and self-expression. The diary becomes a sanctuary, a place where she can express her innermost thoughts without fear of judgment. It is in these private reflections that Anne's maturity and intelligence shine through, as she writes with wisdom and insight that belies her age. Her introspection is not limited to her circumstances, but also extends to her relationships with the people around her. Anne continues to struggle with her feelings of alienation, especially in her relationship with her mother. She feels misunderstood by Edith Frank, whom she believes does not truly understand her needs or desires. Anne frequently criticizes her mother for being overly critical and for treating her differently from Margaret, the older and more obedient sister. The tension between Anne and her mother is palpable, and Anne's words convey a deep longing for affection and understanding that she feels is lacking. In contrast, Anne's bond with her father, Otto, remains strong. She admires him for his calm, thoughtful nature and his unwavering support. Anne finds solace in her relationship with him, though she still feels a sense of frustration at the limitations of their circumstances. The feelings of isolation that Anne experiences are compounded by the constant fear of being discovered. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, and every knock at the door becomes a source of anxiety. The family must live in complete silence during the day to avoid detection by the workers in the building below. Their lives are governed by strict routines, and every movement is calculated to minimize the risk of discovery. The constant vigilance required to maintain this facade is mentally and physically exhausting. Anne's writing reveals the psychological toll this takes on her and the others. Though she tries to maintain a sense of optimism, there are moments of despair. She writes about the suffocating nature of their existence, the uncertainty that hangs over their heads, and the yearning for a life beyond the walls of the annex. In her diary, Anne explores the complex emotions that arise from the heightened tension of living in hiding. There is a constant undercurrent of fear, but also moments of camaraderie and understanding among the residents. Though they are forced to live in close quarters, there are fleeting moments of connection and even moments of laughter. Anne writes about the small joys that help to sustain them, such as sharing books, playing games, and even finding solace in the occasional kindness or act of generosity from one of the others. Despite the oppressive atmosphere of fear, Anne still manages to find fragments of hope and joy, and these moments are deeply significant in her writings. Anne's reflections also turn to her broader thoughts on human nature. The confines of the annex provide her with ample time to consider the world outside and the events that are unfolding in it. The horrors of World War II and the Holocaust are never far from her mind, and Anne writes about her belief that the world will eventually change for the better. Her sense of optimism is striking, even in the face of the ever-present threat of death. Anne's thoughts often turn to the nature of humanity itself, questioning why such atrocities could occur and what could be done to prevent them. It is clear that Anne is not just concerned with her own survival, but is deeply invested in the fate of humanity as a whole. As the months go by, Anne continues to develop both intellectually and emotionally. She writes about her growing awareness of her own identity as a young woman and her struggle to reconcile the innocence of her childhood with the harsh realities of her situation. The process of growing up, compounded by the trauma of living in hiding, forces Anne to mature quickly. In one of her more poignant reflections, she writes about the dichotomy between the person she wants to be and the person she is forced to become due to her circumstances. The pressure to maintain a sense of normalcy while grappling with feelings of fear, frustration, and loss is overwhelming. But Anne faces it with a rare clarity and depth of thought. Anne's writing in these early months of hiding offers a window into her soul, providing us with an intimate view of a young girl coming to terms with her identity, her circumstances, and the world around her. The diary becomes more than just a record of daily events. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Though Anne's life is marked by fear, uncertainty, and confinement, she continues to write with the hope that her words will one day be heard, that her story will contribute to a greater understanding of humanity and the horrors of the Holocaust. As the days and months pass in the annex, Anne's observations grow more introspective, and her relationships with those around her continue to evolve. The constant presence of fear and confinement has already shaped her experience, but now she begins to explore deeper emotional landscapes. The complex interactions between the people in the annex come to the forefront in Anne's writings, providing a snapshot of how people cope with their own internal struggles in such an oppressive environment. One of the more significant dynamics that Anne explores is the relationship between her and Peter Van Pels. Initially, Anne's impressions of Peter are mixed. She finds him somewhat aloof and distant, someone who doesn't share her enthusiasm for conversation or intellectual pursuits. However, as the days wear on, she begins to notice new facets of his personality. As Peter begins to open up, Anne's own curiosity about him grows. She writes about their increasingly frequent conversations, where they start to share their thoughts and feelings more openly. Though their relationship is awkward at first, it gradually becomes one of the most significant emotional connections in the annex. Anne begins to find comfort in Peter's company, even as she continues to feel frustrated by her lack of freedom and the ongoing struggles within the annex. As she describes her developing relationship with Peter, Anne writes not only about his personality, but also about the complex emotional landscape she navigates in the process of growing up. She reflects on the nature of attraction, the changes in her own body, and her desire for love and affection. Anne's curiosity about romantic relationships, particularly her emerging feelings for Peter, is a stark reminder of her youth and the challenges of growing up in such an unusual and dangerous environment. Her exploration of these feelings is both poignant and relatable, as it highlights the universal experience of adolescence. In addition to her emotional evolution, Anne becomes more aware of her family dynamics. Her relationship with her mother continues to be strained, as she feels increasingly misunderstood by Edith. Anne's perception of her mother is one of disappointment. She often feels that Edith is too critical and lacks empathy, The tension between the two women grows, especially as Anne's emotional needs seem to clash with her mother's desire for control and order. She writes about how her mother's attempts to care for her feel like an imposition, and the lack of understanding between them only deepens Anne's sense of isolation. This frustration is compounded by the apparent favoritism she perceives toward Margaret, her older sister, who is more reserved and obedient. Though Anne is aware that her feelings toward her mother may be unfair at times, she cannot shake the sense of emotional distance that separates them. She longs for affection, but the affection she receives from her mother feels cold and distant. The relationship between Anne and Edith is one of the most complicated in the diary, as Anne is caught between the desire for maternal love and the realization that she may never receive it in the way she yearns for. Her father, Otto Frank, remains a source of comfort and stability for her, and Anne's affection for him grows throughout her writings. She often compares her relationship with her father to her relationship with her mother, noting how much more understanding and supportive Otto is in comparison. The strain within the annex is not limited to Anne's family. The tensions between the other members of the hiding group also intensify. Anne writes about the frequent disagreements between the Van Pels family and the Franks. Mr. Van Pels, particularly, seems to bring out the worst in Anne's father, Otto, and vice versa. The competing personalities in the annex, combined with the cramped living conditions, lead to constant friction. Anne's reflections on these interactions reveal the immense pressure placed on the residents of the annex, as they are forced to coexist in such a confined space under constant threat of discovery. It is clear that, despite their best efforts to maintain a sense of order, the personalities and conflicts of the people around her are taking a toll on Anne's own mental health. One of the more striking aspects of Anne's diary during this period is her increasing self-awareness. She is no longer just a young girl writing about the mundane details of daily life. She is now keenly aware of the psychological toll that the hidden life is taking on her. She writes candidly about the frustrations of being unable to go outside, the loneliness she feels from the lack of contact with the outside world, and the growing sense of hopelessness that pervades her thoughts. These reflections are poignant because they give us insight into the psychological effects of living in constant fear. Anne's experience is a microcosm of the suffering faced by many during the Holocaust, trapped, isolated, and living with the constant threat of death. Despite the pervasive sense of hopelessness, Anne's resilience shines through in her writing. She becomes more introspective, analyzing her emotions with a maturity that speaks to her growing intellectual abilities. Anne writes about the importance of maintaining hope, even when everything around her seems to be falling apart. She clings to her belief that writing in her diary allows her to make sense of the chaos, offering her a small semblance of control in a world where control is a luxury she no longer possesses. Her diary becomes a tool of resistance, a way for Anne to preserve her identity and her humanity despite the conditions she faces. Anne's struggle to maintain a sense of normalcy in the face of such extraordinary circumstances continues to shape her writing. She continues her studies, reads books, and engages in deep philosophical musings about life and human nature. Her intellectual curiosity provides her with some relief from the confines of the annex, allowing her to momentarily escape into the world of ideas. However, even in her intellectual pursuits, Anne is reminded of the harshness of her reality. She writes about the tension between her desire to continue learning and growing and the sense of futility that pervades her life in hiding. She realizes that, in some ways, her education feels irrelevant in the face of the horrors that surround her. But she persists nonetheless, driven by the hope that someday she will be able to live in a world where learning and growth are once again possible. Throughout this period, Anne's writing becomes more and more sophisticated, offering profound insights into human nature and the human condition. Her thoughts on war, justice, and the future reflect her deep empathy and understanding of the suffering in the world around her. She remains deeply affected by the atrocities she knows are taking place outside the annex, and her diary becomes a way for her to process her feelings of anger, confusion, and sorrow. Anne's time in hiding is marked by a growing understanding of both her internal and external worlds. She wrestles with the tension between her desire for freedom and the reality of her confinement. But her writing allows her to make sense of her emotions and provide a sense of purpose in the midst of fear. Through her words, Anne paints a vivid portrait of a young girl's journey towards self-discovery, love, and understanding in the face of unimaginable adversity. As the months drag on in the annex, Anne's thoughts and emotions continue to mature, becoming more reflective and complex. The slow passage of time in hiding leads her to grapple with deeper philosophical questions, particularly about the nature of human beings, the meaning of life, and the complexities of the world around her. Her diary becomes a repository for these musings, and it is here that Anne offers some of her most profound insights into the human condition. Anne begins to examine the idea of human nature with more scrutiny, questioning whether people are inherently good or evil. These philosophical reflections emerge as she considers the broader context of the war and the atrocities being committed outside the confines of the annex. The suffering she knows is happening to millions of people in Europe forces her to confront the darker aspects of humanity. But she does so with a nuanced understanding. She writes about the contradictions of human behavior, how people can be capable of both extraordinary cruelty and incredible kindness. It is during this time that Anne reflects on the role of empathy and compassion, emphasizing the importance of understanding others' struggles. Her thoughts on human nature are influenced by the interactions between the people in the annex. The constant proximity of so many different personalities leads Anne to consider the ways in which people's behaviors are shaped by their circumstances. She observes how some individuals in the annex, particularly Mr. Van Pels and Mrs. Van Pels, become more irritable and self-centered as time goes on, while others, like her father Otto, remain calm and composed. Anne struggles to understand why some people are able to maintain their dignity and compassion in such dire circumstances, while others succumb to fear, anger, and selfishness. These observations highlight her developing sense of morality and her desire to understand the intricacies of human behavior. In addition to her philosophical reflections, Anne continues to explore the dynamics of her relationships with the other members of the annex. Her bond with Peter becomes more intense, and their relationship evolves into one marked by both affection and confusion. As Anne's feelings for Peter grow, she also becomes more acutely aware of the complexity of romantic love. She expresses her longing for a deeper connection, but but she also recognizes the impossibility of a full emotional intimacy in their current situation. The constant presence of fear and uncertainty hangs over their interactions, making it difficult for Anne to fully experience the joy of a blossoming relationship. Despite this, she writes about the comfort she finds in Peter's companionship, noting how their moments together offer her a small reprieve from the isolation and dread that dominate her daily existence. The tension between Anne and her mother continues to intensify, with Anne becoming more disillusioned by her mother's inability to understand her emotional needs. She writes about how Edith's attempts to console her feel forced and inadequate. This growing distance between mother and daughter becomes one of the more painful aspects of Anne's time in hiding, as Anne feels increasingly alienated from the woman who should be her closest confidante. Anne's frustration with her mother's perceived lack of empathy is compounded by her growing sense of independence. She feels trapped between the need for maternal affection and the desire for personal freedom. The struggle for identity and autonomy, especially in the context of the intense pressures of hiding, becomes a central theme in her writing. Her relationship with Margot also evolves during this period, and Anne reflects on the ways in which she compares herself to her older sister. Margot's quiet demeanor and adherence to the rules stand in stark contrast to Anne's more outspoken and rebellious nature. Anne often feels overshadowed by Margot, who seems to embody the qualities that their parents value: discipline, responsibility, and maturity. This sense of being the lesser sister fuels Anne's feelings of inadequacy and jealousy. She frequently compares her own emotional volatility to Margot's calmness, which she perceives as a source of her parents' favor. However, despite these feelings of resentment, Anne's writing reveals an underlying sense of love and admiration for Margot. She expresses guilt for the times when she has criticized or resented her sister, and she reflects on how much she values Margot's presence in the annex. Amidst the complex family dynamics, Anne's thoughts on freedom and identity become more pronounced. She feels as though her identity is slipping away in the confines of the annex, as she is denied the opportunity to grow into the person she could have been in the outside world. The intense restrictions placed on her life lead her to question who she truly is, apart from the roles forced upon her by the people around her. She begins to see herself not just as a daughter, a sister, or a girl in hiding, but as an individual trying to carve out a sense of self despite the external pressures. Her writing becomes more introspective as she grapples with the contradictions in her identity, acknowledging both her youthful naivety and the wisdom she has gained through her experiences. This period in the annex also marks a turning point in Anne's spiritual journey. She starts to question the existence of God, given the suffering she knows is taking place in the world. The Holocaust and the sheer scale of human suffering that she has only begun to understand forces Anne to confront her own beliefs. She writes about the ambiguity of faith and her doubts about a higher power that allows such cruelty to exist. However, despite her doubts, Anne continues to find comfort in the idea of love and human kindness. Her exploration of spirituality is deeply personal, reflecting her inner conflict as she tries to make sense of a world that seems so unjust and filled with suffering. Throughout these months, Anne also reflects on the nature of her writing. she begins to see her diary not just as a record of her daily life, but as a tool of self-discovery. Writing becomes an essential part of her existence, allowing her to process her emotions and ideas. Anne sees her diary as her only true companion, and it is through her writing that she is able to maintain a sense of sanity in the face of the crushing weight of her circumstances. The act of writing becomes an act of resistance, as Anne seeks to assert her individuality in a world that seeks to erase her identity. Her diary is the place where she can be honest, vulnerable, and completely herself, something that is increasingly difficult in the oppressive atmosphere of the annex. Anne's observations about the world outside the annex become more poignant as the war drags on. Her awareness of the growing danger outside the walls of the annex deepens, and she becomes increasingly fearful for the fate of her family. She writes about the uncertainty of their future, the hope that the war will end soon, and the constant anxiety that they might be discovered. This fear is compounded by the fact that they are dependent on the people who supply them with food and news, and the growing tensions between the residents of the annex only add to the strain of their situation. Yet, through all the challenges and emotional turmoil, Anne's resilience shines through. She continues to reflect on her identity, relationships, and the world around her with remarkable insight. Her writing becomes a testament to her strength, her ability to navigate the complexities of human emotions, and her unwavering determination to preserve her sense of self amidst the chaos of the world. Anne's emotional state continues to evolve as she faces the relentless confinement of the annex. The tension between the people she is living with intensifies, and the long days begin to feel even more suffocating. Yet, within this claustrophobic existence, Anne continues to engage in profound self-reflection. It is during this time that Anne begins to express a growing awareness of her own emotional and psychological complexity. She realizes that she is not the same person she was before going into hiding, and she begins to see the war and the world itself through an entirely different lens. At this stage in her diary, Anne increasingly explores her relationship with Peter. The two of them have become much closer, and their emotional connection has deepened. Peter's shyness, his introspective nature, and the sense of solitude that he carries with him resonate with Anne, who is equally searching for understanding in the midst of such profound isolation. Their interactions become a source of comfort and understanding for Anne. In Peter, she finds someone who listens, someone who does not try to offer solutions or pity, but simply understands her pain and frustration. However, even as she grows closer to Peter, Anne wrestles with her feelings of uncertainty about their relationship. She acknowledges that their connection is complicated by the ongoing trauma of hiding and the oppressive environment in which they live. There is a tension in her thoughts. Part of her yearns for love and intimacy, while another part recognizes that it is impossible to fully experience these emotions in a situation like theirs. Their bond is both a source of solace and a reminder of what has been denied to them. Alongside her evolving relationship with Peter, Anne continues to confront the ever-present challenge of being a teenager in hiding. The usual rites of adolescence, new experiences, new relationships, and the opportunity to forge an independent identity are all but impossible in the annex. Her physical maturation, which would ordinarily be a time of self-discovery, feels instead like a slow unraveling, with no chance to express her newfound awareness of herself. is keenly aware of her changing body, her desires, and the emotional turmoil that comes with them. However, these changes are contained in a small, stifling space with no possibility of growth or exploration. As a result, Anne's diary becomes an even more important space for her to articulate her thoughts and feelings, to make sense of her internal world when the outside world offers no opportunity for expression. Anne's relationship with her parents continues to evolve, and her feelings toward her mother become more complicated. She describes her mother as distant and often cold, unable to provide the emotional support that Anne longs for. Anne's frustration with her mother reaches a peak, and she writes about how she feels that her mother is unable to understand her. In contrast, her father Otto is often portrayed as a source of comfort and security. His calm and loving nature stands in stark contrast to the volatile emotions that run through the household. Although Anne remains deeply attached to her father, she begins to recognize the toll that their prolonged confinement has taken on him. She understands that his ability to maintain a sense of calm is, in part, a reflection of his desire to protect his family. However, the fragility of their situation weighs heavily on everyone in the annex, and even Anne's father is not immune to the emotional strain. The family dynamics in the annex continue to shift, and Anne's observations of the others living with them grow sharper. She writes about the increasing friction between the Van Pels and the Franks, noting the growing sense of tension that permeates the household. The long hours spent in such close quarters have caused underlying resentments to come to the surface. Anne reflects on the ways in which people, under extreme stress, reveal parts of themselves that might otherwise remain hidden. She sees how the constant fear and uncertainty bring out both the best and worst in people, and she grapples with the realization that the pressures of their situation have brought out some unpleasant qualities in the adults she is living with. Despite her own struggles, Anne finds herself observing others with increasing clarity, recognizing the complexity of their personalities and the multifaceted nature of human behavior. Throughout these months, Anne also continues to reflect on the state of the world beyond the walls of the annex. She writes about the war, the political turmoil, and the ever-present threat of discovery. Her thoughts on the war become increasingly introspective, and she begins to question the nature of conflict itself. She writes about the futility of war, the senseless destruction it causes, and the toll it takes on the human soul. Anne's observations are filled with a deep sadness as she recognizes that the war has not only ravaged the physical world, but also the emotional and psychological well-being of those affected by it. The war has taken away not only the lives of so many people, but also the opportunity for Anne and others like her to live fully and freely. Anne's musings on the war are complicated by her growing awareness of the injustices being committed by the Nazi regime. As she learns more about the atrocities being carried out in the name of the war, Anne's sense of outrage and helplessness deepens. She reflects on the nature of evil, on the cruelty that humans are capable of when driven by hate and fear. Anne writes about the hatred she feels for the people who are perpetrating such crimes and the hopelessness that comes with knowing that there is little she can do to stop it. This internal struggle becomes a major part of her writing as she tries to reconcile her deep sense of moral outrage with the helplessness that she feels living in hiding. In the midst of her reflections on the outside world, Anne's thoughts on her own future become more prominent. She begins to imagine what her life could have been like if the war had not intervened. She dreams of being a writer, of going to a school where she could study and engage with ideas. She imagines a life where she could express herself freely, without fear, without the constant threat of danger looming over her. These dreams are both a source of solace and a source of sorrow, as Anne knows that such a life is out of reach. Yet, in her writing, she allows herself to dream of a future beyond the walls of the annex. This hope for the future, even in the face of overwhelming darkness, becomes a testament to Anne's resilience and her unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world, even if she will not live to see it. Despite the ongoing hardships, Anne's ability to reflect, to question, and to process her emotions continues to deepen. She holds on to her desire to understand the world, the people in it, and herself. Her diary remains a place of refuge, a space where she can work through her thoughts and navigate the complexities of her existence. Through her words, Anne offers a glimpse into her soul, her fears, her hopes, her frustrations, and her quiet determination to make sense of a world that, at times, seems incomprehensible. As time continues to pass in the annex, Anne's thoughts and emotions become more complex, shaped by the growing tension that surrounds her and those she lives with. The reality of their situation is becoming more palpable, and Anne's reflections deepen as she navigates the constant uncertainty that defines their lives in hiding. Anne's diary has become not just a record of the events in the annex, but a window into her soul, as she expresses her thoughts, doubts, and desires with increasing honesty. One of the key themes that Anne grapples with during this period is her relationship with the other members of the annex. As the months stretch on, she finds herself observing the behavior of those around her with a keen eye. She writes candidly about the growing tension between the adults, particularly the conflicts that arise between the Van Pels and the Franks. The stress of their confinement brings out both the best and the worst in people. Anne watches as the small irritations that might otherwise be overlooked begin to fester and grow into open hostility. Even those who were once close are now driven to confront one another, their nerves frayed by the unrelenting pressure of their circumstances. These rifts in the community make Anne even more aware of the fragility of human relationships. She begins to see the ways in which fear and the threat of violence can push people to behave in ways they might never have imagined before. In particular, Anne's relationship with her mother continues to evolve. She writes more critically of her mother, describing the ways in which she feels misunderstood and unsupported by her. Anne's frustration with her mother is palpable. She feels that her mother lacks the ability to see her as an individual, instead treating her like a child who needs constant care and attention. This emotional distance leaves Anne feeling isolated and even more alienated in a world already marked by physical confinement. In contrast, Anne's bond with her father continues to be a source of comfort. Otto Frank, ever the calm and considerate presence in the annex, remains her pillar of stability. Though she recognizes his deep concern for her and the other inhabitants of the annex, she also begins to see the toll that the constant pressure is taking on him. His normally composed demeanor starts to crack, and Anne is perceptive enough to notice this. Despite her frustrations with her mother, Anne still turns to her father when she seeks understanding and solace, highlighting the deep trust and admiration she has for him. This period also sees Anne's relationship with Peter take another step forward. The two continue to grow closer, and Anne often writes about her feelings for him. She describes him as a sensitive and intelligent person, someone who shares her sense of introspection and melancholy. However, their connection is complicated by their circumstances. Both are aware that their feelings for each other exist in a bubble, surrounded by the unspoken tension of their situation. Anne is keenly aware of the limitations of their relationship, knowing that it is shaped by the constant fear of discovery and the crushing weight of their isolation. In moments of vulnerability, she confesses to herself that she wishes for more than the fleeting moments of connection that they can share in the annex. But she also understands that these feelings are ephemeral, temporary moments in an otherwise suffocating reality. Her attraction to Peter becomes both a source of solace and a reminder of everything they cannot have. Amidst these complex relationships, Anne's reflections on her own identity continue to develop. She is keenly aware of the changes she is undergoing as a young woman, both physically and emotionally. In many ways, the experience of hiding has prevented her from exploring the world in the way that she would have liked. Her intellectual and emotional growth is stunted by the constant confinement. But Anne refuses to let that stop her from examining herself and her feelings. She writes about her frustrations with the limitations imposed by her situation. But she also recognizes that the annex has become a space where she can delve deeper into her own thoughts. It is in these moments of reflection that Anne reveals her growing self-awareness. She recognizes that, although her outward circumstances have changed dramatically, she is still the same person on the inside. The person who is discovering herself, struggling with emotions, and seeking love and acceptance has not disappeared. She is just confined to a smaller, more isolated world. As the war continues to rage on outside the walls of the annex, Anne's thoughts on the broader world become more poignant and desperate. She continues to read the news when she can, trying to piece together what is happening outside and to understand the implications of the war on her own life. Her musings on the war are filled with anguish. She writes about the horrors that are being inflicted upon the Jewish people, the suffering of those caught in the crossfire, and the seeming futility of it all. Anne is filled with a deep sense of helplessness, knowing that there is little she or anyone else in the annex can do to change the course of the war. She writes about the cruelty and the inhumanity of the Nazis, the loss of life, and the unimaginable grief experienced by so many. Despite the deep sorrow she feels, Anne refuses to give in to despair entirely. Her writing becomes an act of defiance in itself. Her determination to record her thoughts, to give voice to her experiences, is a form of resistance against the tyranny that seeks to silence her and so many others. Anne's thoughts on the war are not just about the destruction and suffering she witnesses from a distance. They are also a reflection of her own internal battles. The conflict outside is mirrored in her own emotional turmoil as she wrestles with questions about identity, fate, and purpose. She contemplates the meaning of life in such an uncertain and hostile world. She wonders if there is any hope for the future and whether the darkness that surrounds her will ever lift. Anne's writing captures the anguish of living in such a volatile and dangerous time, yet it also reveals the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, Anne continues to hold on to her belief in the possibility of goodness, the hope that one day people will find a way to live together in peace. In her diary, Anne also continues to record the small victories and moments of joy that help her cope with the overwhelming grief. There are days when she feels a sense of relief and calm, when she can forget, if only briefly, about the war and the dangers outside. In those moments, she finds solace in the things that make life bearable: her writing, her growing connection with Peter, and the quiet companionship of those who share her space in the annex. These brief, fleeting moments are reminders of her resilience, of her determination to survive, to keep going even when everything around her suggests otherwise. As Anne's emotional and intellectual journey unfolds in her diary, it becomes clear that her writing is her most important form of expression. In a world where words can be dangerous and silence is often the norm, Anne's voice remains loud and unflinching. Her diary serves as a testament to her strength, her insight, and her unyielding desire to understand both herself and the world she lives in. As the months drag on, Anne's world in the annex becomes increasingly constrained by the growing tension and the limitations of their isolated existence. The complex relationships between the inhabitants of the hiding place continue to evolve, and Anne's reflections on them become more intricate and insightful. The weight of their constant fear is beginning to take its toll on everyone, but Anne's introspective nature leads her to continue exploring the depths of her emotions and thoughts. One of the more prominent themes in this section is Anne's sense of loneliness. Despite the people around her, she feels deeply isolated. Her constant struggles to communicate with her mother and her growing rift with the other members of the annex make her long for a sense of connection that remains elusive. Anne expresses frustration over the fact that the people closest to her don't seem to understand her. She feels misunderstood by her mother, whose affection and attention often feel smothering, and by the others in the annex, who she believes are too caught up in their own problems to recognize hers. Anne's longing for the companionship of someone who can truly see her is palpable in her writing. She writes about the intense desire for a deep, meaningful relationship, one that goes beyond the superficial interactions of their confined lives. She yearns for a sense of normalcy, for the ability to engage in the world beyond the walls of the annex, but she knows that this is impossible. Throughout her diary, Anne describes her growing attachment to Peter, the young man in the annex with her. Their bond continues to deepen, but it is marked by the complex realities of their shared situation. They confide in one another, discussing their dreams, fears, and the emotional toll of living in hiding. Anne often writes about the vulnerability she feels when she is with Peter, acknowledging that, although they have begun to share more intimate moments, their connection is defined by the confines of their environment. They are bound together by circumstance rather than choice, and Anne is acutely aware of the limitations of their relationship. She longs for more, but is often resigned to the fact that their situation can never allow for the kind of love and companionship she imagines. In her moments of reflection, Anne becomes more aware of the person she is becoming. Her introspection deepens as she grapples with the reality of her own changing identity. She recognizes that the young girl she once was is slipping away, replaced by a more mature, complicated version of herself. Anne's thoughts about her own personal development are intertwined with the trauma she faces daily. She realizes that her experience in hiding is irrevocably altering her, both emotionally and psychologically. She writes about the ways in which her sense of self has shifted, noting that she has had to become stronger, more resilient, and more self-reliant in order to survive the challenges of her environment. Anne's reflections on her emotional growth are a testament to her intelligence and self-awareness. While she continues to feel the weight of her circumstances, she is also beginning to gain a deeper understanding of herself and her place in the world. In this section of the diary, Anne begins to show more concern for the other people in the annex. As she observes their behaviors, she becomes more attuned to the ways in which their anxieties and fears are affecting them. The ongoing tension between the adults in the annex is a recurring theme, and Anne writes about the ways in which this tension manifests itself in petty quarrels and disagreements. The constant fear of discovery has eroded the once harmonious relationships between the residents. Anne recognizes the strain that living in such close quarters is placing on everyone, and she writes about the emotional exhaustion that comes with never feeling truly safe. The annex, which was once a sanctuary of sorts, has become a place where fear and uncertainty permeate every aspect of their lives. The idea of a future outside the walls of the annex feels increasingly distant and unreachable. Amid the growing tension, Anne's thoughts about the outside world become even more poignant. She continues to follow the news of the war, though it is often difficult to glean much useful information. She writes about her deep concerns for her friends and family who are not in hiding, wondering if they are safe, and contemplating the fate of the Jewish people in the face of growing persecution. Anne's reflections on the war are increasingly despairing, but she also expresses a quiet hope for the future. Despite the horrors she has witnessed and the tragedies that have unfolded around her, Anne still clings to the belief that good will ultimately triumph over evil. She writes about the importance of hope and faith, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. For Anne, hope becomes a lifeline, a way to endure the unimaginable. Anne's relationship with her own faith also becomes a topic of greater introspection. She grapples with her Jewish identity in ways that reflect her growing understanding of the complexities of religion and its role in her life. While she continues to struggle with the traditional aspects of her faith, she also comes to see its deeper, more spiritual meaning. She writes about the ways in which her religious beliefs provide her with a sense of strength, offering her the courage to continue despite the darkness that surrounds her. Anne's exploration of her faith is part of her larger quest to make sense of the world around her. Her questions about religion, fate, and the purpose of her life are woven into her diary entries as she searches for meaning in a time of overwhelming chaos. Through her writing, Anne begins to understand the significance of her experiences. Although she is still very young, she recognizes the weight of the historical moment she is living through. Her reflections on the world outside the annex are marked by a sense of both grief and hope, a complex blend of despair and determination. She understands that her experiences will shape her for the rest of her life, but she also believes that there is value in recording her story. Writing becomes an act of defiance, a way to preserve her voice in the face of forces that seek to erase her and others like her. Anne's belief in the power of the written word becomes even more pronounced during this period. She knows that her diary is not just a personal outlet. It is also a way to ensure that her experiences are not forgotten. As Anne navigates the emotional landscape of her life in the annex, she remains ever hopeful that she will one day be able to share her story with the world. Her diary is not just an escape from the reality of her confinement. It is also a way for her to make sense of her experiences, to give meaning to the life she is forced to live. Anne's resilience shines through in her writing as she continues to confront the fear and uncertainty of her situation with courage, insight, and determination. Despite the overwhelming challenges she faces, Anne's spirit remains unbroken, a testament to the strength of the human will to survive and to make sense of the chaos that life can sometimes bring. As time continues to pass in the annex, Anne's thoughts become increasingly reflective as she begins to assess not only her situation, but also the dynamics between the people with whom she is forced to live. The anxiety of the possibility of discovery is never far from anyone's mind, but the emotional strain of living in isolation also creates a complex web of personal dynamics. Anne, while still young, grows more aware of the nuances of human behavior, and her observations of her fellow hideaways become more insightful and critical. The presence of fear, as well as the limitations of living in close quarters, exacerbate existing tensions. It is clear that the months spent hiding have frayed the nerves of the inhabitants, and the constant strain of wondering if the day will come when they will be discovered weighs heavily on them all. Anne is not immune to this pressure, and she often writes about the sense of dread that seems to hang in the air. Yet, despite this, she remains deeply reflective, using her diary as an outlet for processing her thoughts and emotions. It is through her writing that Anne attempts to make sense of the conflict, both internal and external, that pervades her world. One of the prominent themes during this period is Anne's increasing frustration with the adults around her. She often feels misunderstood by her mother, whose overt displays of affection she finds suffocating. Anne writes about her sense of alienation from her mother, describing their relationship as strained and difficult. She notes that she yearns for the warmth and tenderness she once received from her father, but now her interactions with both parents are characterized by misunderstandings and a sense of distance. The lack of closeness with her mother becomes a frequent source of frustration, and Anne expresses a deep longing for a different kind of maternal relationship, one in which she feels truly understood. The contrast between her relationships with her parents is striking, and Anne's ability to analyze these dynamics in her diary shows her maturity and emotional intelligence. The relationship between Anne and Peter, the young boy in hiding with her, continues to evolve as well. In the earlier months, their connection was tentative and cautious, but as time passes, they begin to rely on each other more. The isolation of their situation, however, makes their relationship feel more complicated. Anne writes about her growing feelings for Peter, but she is also acutely aware of the limitations of their connection. Though they share moments of tenderness, Anne is keenly aware that their bond is defined by the context of their confinement. They are not free to explore their feelings fully, and this unspoken tension creates a sense of uncertainty between them. Anne continues to confide in Peter, but at the same time, she understands that their relationship is ultimately shaped by the uncertainty of their environment. She also wrestles with the realization that the emotional closeness she desires is something that might never be fully realized, given their circumstances. At the same time, Anne's emotional landscape becomes more complex as she reflects on her own sense of identity. She recognizes that her experience in hiding has shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. The isolation and fear have forced her to confront difficult questions about herself and her place in the world. Anne writes about her struggles with her self-image, describing how her outward appearance and her sense of worth have changed as a result of the constant pressure she faces. She acknowledges that the outward signs of her changing body are a reflection of the inner transformations she is undergoing. Anne is becoming more aware of the ways in which her identity is being influenced by her circumstances, and she uses her diary as a means of grappling with the confusion and uncertainty she feels about herself. The growing sense of helplessness Anne feels about her situation becomes more apparent as she expresses her concerns about the world beyond the annex. The war continues to rage on, and Anne's anxiety about the fate of her friends and family outside the hideout intensifies. She is often preoccupied with thoughts of what is happening to the people she loves, and her fear for their safety is compounded by the ongoing horrors of the war. Her diary entries during this period reveal the toll the war is taking on her emotional well-being. She is haunted by the sense of loss, knowing that she cannot protect her loved ones or even know for certain whether they are safe. The pain of separation from the world outside becomes a heavy burden, and Anne often reflects on the changes she wishes she could make to ensure the safety and well-being of those she cares about. Yet, despite the growing fear and uncertainty, Anne's strength lies in her ability to continue writing, using her diary as a means of processing the turmoil within her. Her relationship with the other members of the annex remains tense. Anne often writes about the conflicts that arise among the residents, particularly those involving Mr. and Mrs. Van Don. The constant quarreling between the couple creates an atmosphere of discomfort and unease, which only adds to the collective anxiety of the group. Anne, ever the keen observer, notes the ways in which these disagreements highlight the complex personalities and frailties of those living in the annex. The tensions between the Van Dons and the others underscore the fragility of their situation and the ways in which fear and stress can bring out both the best and worst in people. Though Anne finds herself caught in the middle of these tensions, she continues to analyze the behaviors of those around her with a mixture of detachment and empathy. Her ability to navigate these complicated dynamics speaks to her growing emotional intelligence as she learns to balance her own needs with the needs of those around her. As Anne reflects on her own experiences and the emotions she is feeling, she comes to understand that the act of writing is both an outlet and a means of survival. The diary offers her a chance to make sense of the world around her, even if that world is confined to the walls of the annex. It is through her writing that Anne gains a sense of control over her life, a way to hold onto her humanity despite the darkness and uncertainty. Though she is separated from the rest of the world, her diary allows her to remain connected to herself, to her thoughts, and to her hopes for the future. Through her observations of the people in the annex and her growing self-awareness, Anne becomes more conscious of the power dynamics at play in her world. The limitations imposed upon her by the war, her gender, and her age all contribute to the complex, ever-shifting reality she faces. Yet despite these limitations, Anne remains resilient. Her reflections on the nature of fear, hope, love, and identity provide a window into the soul of a young girl whose courage and insight are enduring, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Anne's journey is one of growth, of grappling with the harsh realities of war and the pain of separation. And yet, it is also a journey of self-discovery and hope. Through her diary, Anne Frank continues to tell a story that resonates far beyond the confines of the annex, offering a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As the months in hiding stretch on, Anne Frank's diary becomes an even more vital and emotional outlet for her, as she experiences a continued struggle to find meaning in her increasingly constrained existence. The weight of the ongoing war looms large, and although Anne is physically confined to the annex, her mind and heart wander through a more expansive realm of thoughts, emotions, and reflections. With her perspective deepening, Anne begins to contemplate the nature of the world she inhabits in a more profound way. The sense of despair she feels is palpable, but so too is her capacity for hope, which continues to manifest itself in unexpected ways. She writes about the overwhelming sense of guilt that she carries for not feeling sorrowful about certain aspects of her life, particularly her own privileged existence, while so many others are suffering. She feels that her fear and discomfort in the annex are selfish, considering the broader context of the world outside, where her people are enduring much worse fates. This internal struggle becomes more pronounced, and Anne's self-awareness sharpens as she examines her emotions in a way that most young people her age would never be forced to do. Anne contemplates the discrepancy between her private fears, desires, and guilt, and the broader, collective tragedy of the Jewish people. It is a complicated dance between introspection and the recognition that her own personal battles are small in comparison to the immense suffering surrounding her. Alongside these darker reflections, Anne grows increasingly philosophical about her situation, grappling with a series of existential questions that demonstrate her maturity. She considers the idea of fate, of being chosen, of the injustice of her situation, and of what might come next. There are moments when she imagines a future outside of the annex, a world where she might live freely and have the chance to pursue her own dreams. These moments of imagination and daydreaming are a testament to her resilience and refusal to be wholly consumed by despair. Yet, despite the occasional flashes of optimism, Anne also writes about the weight of uncertainty that pervades every aspect of her life. And it is in these entries that the raw emotions she feels are conveyed most powerfully. Anne's writing about the people with whom she is forced to live continues to evolve. The close quarters of the annex begin to erode any pretense of politeness, and the intimate setting highlights the quirks, foibles, and flaws of each individual. The adults in the annex, particularly Mr. and Mrs. Van Don, are more of a source of irritation to Anne as she becomes increasingly critical of their behavior. The constant bickering between the couple seems to add to the tension and discomfort already present in the hideout. Anne becomes more disillusioned with their petty quarrels, but she also recognizes that the situation is difficult for everyone. Even though their behavior frustrates her, she also understands the underlying cause: fear, isolation, and the the stress of living under constant threat. It is in these moments of empathy that Anne demonstrates her emotional growth, as she is able to temper her frustration with a broader understanding of the human condition. The relationship between Anne and Peter continues to evolve too. Their connection deepens over time, though it remains a complicated one. Initially, Anne viewed Peter with skepticism, finding him awkward and difficult to relate to. However, as the days in hiding drag on, their mutual need for companionship becomes more apparent. In many ways, their growing relationship offers Anne an escape from the harsh realities of her life. She comes to admire Peter in ways that she had not anticipated, and the time they spend together in the annex provides her with a glimpse of the companionship and intimacy that she longs for. Despite this, Anne remains torn by her feelings of guilt about her closeness with Peter. She questions the propriety of her emotions, given the context of the world around her and the fact that their time together may be fleeting. The complexity of Anne's feelings is compounded by her developing awareness of her own identity. She writes frequently about her changing body and the growing sense of womanhood that is becoming a significant part of her life. These reflections are tinged with a sense of longing, as Anne's physical and emotional development is occurring within the confines of the annex, far from the normal experiences that come with adolescence. There is a bittersweetness to her writings about this stage of her life, as she is aware that her youth is being shaped by fear and uncertainty, rather than the carefree moments of teenage life that others might experience. Anne yearns for a sense of normalcy, for the ability to experience the milestones of growing up in a less constrained way. But she understands that her reality is very different from that of most other teenagers. The people in the annex continue to shape Anne's worldview, and her insights about human nature become more sophisticated. The presence of tension, suspicion, and occasional cruelty among those around her is a reality Anne must contend with on a daily basis. She writes with an increasingly clear-eyed understanding of the fragile bonds that exist between people, especially under duress. While she often expresses frustration with those around her, she also recognizes the ways in which their shared vulnerability draws them together. Anne's diary becomes a mirror for her evolving views of human relationships, one in which she begins to see the complexities and contradictions that define even the most seemingly simple interactions. It is in these nuanced reflections that Anne's wisdom shines through, and it becomes clear that her time in hiding has profoundly shaped her perspective. In addition to her personal growth, Anne's diary also reveals a growing sense of connection to the wider world. Despite the seclusion of her physical space, Anne is increasingly aware of the world beyond the annex walls. She writes about the broader state of the war, expressing concern and anguish over the fate of the Jewish people and the countless others suffering due to the conflict. She yearns for news, any kind of information that might shed light on the outside world. Yet the information that trickles in only serves to amplify her anxiety. The war continues to ravage Europe, and Anne's thoughts often return to the uncertainty of what is happening beyond the borders of her hideout. The fragility of human life is always present in her writing, and the sense of vulnerability she feels is amplified by the ever-present fear of being discovered. In her writing, Anne often grapples with the meaning of her existence. She questions her role in the world, wondering what purpose her life serves if she is forced into hiding, isolated from the world around her. The constant fear of death hangs over her, and Anne wrestles with the possibility that her life might not have the chance to fulfill the dreams and ambitions she once had. But despite these dark thoughts, she finds a glimmer of hope in her writing, a sense of purpose in the act of recording her thoughts and reflections. Writing becomes an act of defiance, a way of asserting her identity in a world that seems determined to strip it away. Through her words, Anne seeks to leave a mark, to preserve her story, and by extension, the stories of others who suffered alongside her. As Anne's life in hiding continues, the harsh realities of living in constant fear of discovery, hunger, and isolation take a heavy toll on her. Yet even as the situation becomes increasingly dire, her reflections continue to offer profound insights into the human condition, illustrating the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. The emotional and psychological strain of living under these conditions gradually becomes more apparent in Anne's writing. But even as she experiences moments of despair, she remains determined to record her thoughts and observations, knowing that this diary is one of the only outlets she has left for her emotions. Throughout the final entries of her diary, Anne continues to grapple with her sense of identity and her place in the world. She is now fully aware of the impact the war has had on her own life, as well as on the lives of those around her. She writes about the challenges of being a teenager in hiding and the difficulties of trying to navigate relationships with the other members of the annex while dealing with her own complex emotions. She acknowledges the tension that exists between her longing for normalcy and the unrelenting pressure of her circumstances, which continually force her to confront the brutal realities of her life. Despite the constant strain of living in fear, Anne's introspection grows deeper. She reflects on the changes she has undergone over the course of her time in hiding, noting that her personal growth has been shaped not only by the hardships she has faced, but also by the relationships she has developed with others in the annex. These relationships, though complicated by the stress of their shared existence, also offer Anne a sense of connection and understanding that helps her cope with the isolation she feels. Even though she is physically cut off from the world, Anne finds ways to express her creativity and her desire for freedom through her writing. She increasingly uses her diary as a means of articulating her dreams, her frustrations, and her hopes for the future. And through this process, she becomes more in tune with her inner world. Anne's growing awareness of the fragility of life becomes more pronounced as she writes about the constant fear of discovery. The threat of capture is always looming, and she reflects on the many ways in which this fear has shaped her perspective on life. She acknowledges the fact that her survival is entirely dependent on the actions of those who are helping the group, and she is aware that their safety is tenuous at best. This realization adds an even greater layer of tension to her already uncertain existence, and it becomes clear that Anne's emotional state is increasingly fragile as she confronts the possibility of death at any moment. The constant worry that she and her family could be discovered at any time becomes a source of deep anxiety, and she writes about the toll that this fear has taken on her mental and emotional well-being. Despite the looming threat of death, Anne never loses her sense of hope completely. There are still moments in her diary where she expresses her belief that one day she will be able to live a life free from the confines of hiding. She imagines a world where she is able to pursue her dreams, where she can be a writer and experience the world in all its beauty and complexity. These moments of optimism, though fleeting, serve as a testament to Anne's resilience and her unwavering determination to hold on to her humanity in the face of unimaginable hardship. Her ability to imagine a future beyond the walls of the annex reflects her refusal to let the war define her entirely. In the midst of overwhelming adversity, Anne continues to cling to the hope that there is a life beyond the darkness of her current circumstances. However, as the war drags on, Anne begins to realize that her dreams for the future may never come to fruition. She writes about the increasing sense of uncertainty she feels, both about her own life and about the world around her. The news of the ongoing atrocities being committed by the Nazis, as well as the ever-present danger of discovery, casts a shadow over Anne's ability to dream. Her hope becomes more fragile, tempered by the reality that the world she imagines may never come to be. Yet even as her hopes begin to wane, Anne finds solace in the act of writing itself. Her diary becomes not only a record of her life, but also a way for her to make sense of the chaos and suffering that surrounds her. In her final entries, Anne speaks of her desire to be remembered, of her hope that her words will live on long after she is gone. The end of Anne's diary marks a tragic and poignant conclusion to her remarkable account of life in hiding. The entry that closes the diary is full of a mixture of sorrow and strength as Anne contemplates the future and her place in the world. She expresses the hope that she will live to see the end of the war and that she will one day be able to share her story with the world. But despite the sadness that pervades her final entry, there is also a quiet strength in her words. Anne's writing has become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a powerful reminder of the capacity for hope and courage even in the face of unimaginable suffering. Anne's diary ultimately becomes a symbol of the millions of lives lost in the Holocaust, as well as a powerful reminder of the dangers of intolerance and hatred. Through her words, Anne gives voice to the voiceless, capturing the humanity and dignity of those who were persecuted and murdered during the war. Her reflections on the nature of human existence, her struggle to find meaning in a world torn apart by violence and hatred, and her unwavering hope for a better future serve as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Anne's story continues to resonate with readers around the world, and her diary remains one of the most important and moving accounts of the Holocaust. In the end, the diary of a young girl stands as a powerful and enduring work that transcends its historical context. Anne Frank's words continue to inspire readers of all ages, offering a message of hope, resilience, and the importance of remembering those who suffered during the darkest chapter of human history. Through her diary, Anne Frank has ensured that her voice will never be silenced, and her legacy continues to live on in the hearts and minds of millions. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank is more than just a historical account of a young Jewish girl's life during the Holocaust. It is a deeply personal, intimate narrative that reveals the complexities of human emotions, the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet strength found in the act of preserving one's thoughts, dreams, and hopes in the most oppressive of circumstances. Anne Frank's diary has transcended time, place, and context, becoming one of the most poignant and enduring voices of the Holocaust, and one of the most significant works of literature to come out of this tragic period in history. Throughout her writings, Anne's reflections are marked by a profound maturity far beyond her years. She writes not just about her experiences, but about the universal struggles of growing up, the challenges of identity, and the quest for self-understanding in an ever-changing world. Her ability to articulate her inner turmoil, dreams, and fears creates a vivid portrait of a young girl coming to terms with the complexities of human nature, relationships, and society. Yet what makes Anne's account particularly powerful is her unwavering hope and desire for a future, despite the oppressive environment she lives in. Her observations about the people in the annex, the constant fear of discovery, and the impact of war on the human psyche are remarkable for their insight and emotional depth. Anne's writing serves as both a mirror and a lens through which readers can better understand the devastating effects of hatred, discrimination, and violence. Her diary is not only a testimony to the brutality faced by Jews during the Holocaust, but also a testament to the enduring power of hope, love, and personal expression. The tragedy of Anne's life, cut short at the tender age of 15, makes her diary all the more heart-wrenching. The possibility that Anne could have contributed much more to the world had she lived is a thought that lingers with the reader long after the final words of her diary are read. Yet in her brief time, Anne leaves behind a legacy that transcends her personal story. Her diary has become an essential part of world history, a reminder of the importance of tolerance, empathy, and understanding. It forces us to confront the consequences of hatred and prejudice while offering a message of hope for a better, more compassionate future. Anne's story continues to resonate with generations of readers around the world. Her diary speaks to the human condition, the vulnerability of youth, and the emotional complexities that define the human experience. It reminds us of the importance of speaking out against injustice, standing up for those who are oppressed, and preserving the memories of those who were silenced by history. Anne Frank's words are timeless, her courage eternal, and her story is one that will never be forgotten. In conclusion, the diary of a young girl serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of recording our personal experiences and reflections. For it is in these individual voices that the true essence of human life is captured. Anne Frank's diary not only serves as a memorial to her life, but also as a beacon for future generations, urging us to remember the past, learn from it, and work towards a world where the horrors of prejudice and hatred are never allowed to take root again. Through Anne's words, we are reminded that the most valuable gift we can offer the world is not just survival, but the preservation of our humanity, our thoughts, and our hopes for a better tomorrow.